Do. Thank you very much for joining us. Thank you very much for being on the program. Can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you a bit vaguely, but...
All right. Okay, thanks so much. You heard the president speaking a little bit earlier on, and he tried to give a version. He tried to give his side of the story. Do you think that it was enough of an argument to sway public opinion about whether he should go or not?
What's interesting is that the president up until now had not indicated where or what his position was. And what's important here is that he needed to come out and talk to lay his side of the story out in the public domain. And so with the interview with the senior anchor, a senior reporter with the SABC, I think he tried to portray what was the image, the impact, and what was going on in terms of his side of the story. Obviously, in the way that it came across, people have had mixed reactions to this. People on social media and other spaces have argued that this is about a person who has now come out at the last hour to indicate his innocence, that he's been victimized, he's been let down by his organization and party. He feels as if he's been put in a corner and dealt a heavy blow without giving the due respect that a leader of his caliber needs. And that's what the tone of that interview was, coming out and saying that this is something that the party didn't afford him the respect and the level of respect that he needed as an individual.
So one interesting thing that he said is, I haven't done anything wrong. Nobody could convince me that I'd done anything wrong. But where he sits as president, he often reshuffles his cabinet, he deploys and redeploys, and it doesn't necessarily because they've done anything wrong. He just wants to freshen things up. Is it a bit disingenuous of him to be demanding differently to what he actually does himself when he's running government?
Well, I think there's two realities here. There's the reality of what we've seen the president, what the country has been like under his rule. And then there's President Zuma's reality. And in his reality, he hasn't seen anything that he has done wrong. His reshuffles are clearly within his prerogative in terms of the Constitution. He has that power to do that. He's not happy with something. He reshuffles when he wants to. But he doesn't really look at what the consequences are. And so suddenly now, he's sitting in a situation where he's an unhinged individual. That somehow power has expediently seeped out of his control. I think to a large extent as well, we can't ignore what's happening this morning with regard to the raid on the Gupta compound and the impact of that. But to a large extent, I think President Zuma sees the world according to President Zuma. And so in his mind, he's asking the question, what did I do wrong? And I think to the larger, broader community, public, and the general public, they are saying, well, you're taking us to the tipping point. You've taken us to the tipping point. We've seen levels of unemployment. We've seen our credit rating drop. We've seen inflation. We've seen the rand being vulnerable to internal policy uncertainty. And yet you don't know what you've done. So I think this is perhaps what we have to deal with, is these two realities. That there's a reality of President Zuma where he, in himself, he has seen his context as, well, I didn't do anything wrong, tell me what I did wrong. And then there's reality of what we as ordinary South Africans experience. And this is eventually what I think we have to think about very critically in terms of how he sees this reality in the broader context of our political governance structure.
He presented what some people might say is an interesting argument about this two centers of power issue, where he said that the only context that was because Thabo Mbeki was trying to become a president for a third term, which would have meant 5 more years as ANC president whilst there's another head of state, and that it never referred to this interim period between the elective conference and the national elections.
Yeah, I think it was interesting that he went in trying to explain those two centers of power and trying to relay it back to the 2007 Polokwane issue and talked about President Thabo Mbeki at the time going for a third term as president of the party. But I think there's also a bit of economical address around the truth and how he said this, because I think he in himself also realizes that he's trying to justify something where in 2007 2007, 2008, there were questions about this two centers of power that went beyond just the elective conference. It wasn't about the question of whether President Mbeki was going to continue. There was questions about whether the two centers of power can actually reconcile and work with each other. And I think this in itself is a president that's come out who essentially is now trying to justify on the basis of how he interpreted the two centers of power and trying to say, well, what the ANC is doing now with this whole motion of no confidence in terms of parliament and the recall, etc., is basically being what he would call as not negotiating in good faith.
Sanusha, we're going to have to leave it there. That was Sanush Naidu speaking to us about the conversation we had with President Zuma a little bit earlier on. And if you're watching on SABC2, this is where we have to say goodbye to you as well. Thanks very much for tuning in for this special broadcast this afternoon, looking at the future of President Jacob Zuma, an exclusive interview that we brought to you here on this channel. And we're going to take a quick break and we'll continue with more on your various channels.